Hello and welcome to Curriculum Hotspot video series for high school. This is going to be looking at homeostasis, standard LS13. Let's start by reading the standard and clarifying the expectations for students. Students will plan and conduct an investigation to provide evidence that feedback mechanisms maintain homeostasis. Clarification statement. Examples of investigations could include heart rate response to exercise, stomate response to moisture and temperature, and root development in response to water levels. Assessment boundary. Assessment does not include the cellular processes involved in the feedback mechanism. So what students do need to know. So this standard will explore how feedback systems help to maintain internal conditions. This is also going to be looking at cross-cutting concept, where students will plan and carry out investigations. So when I start teaching this, I always like to show this image, and I like to talk to the students about their houses, right? Like, so where does everyone like to keep the temperature at their house? Some people say they like to keep it at like 75, some 68. So we just kind of start off with a very casual conversation. Then I talk to the students about, okay, well, what happens when the temperature in your house goes up, right? It gets too hot. The students tell me, oh, the air conditioning kicks on. Okay, and then I'm like, well, what happens when it gets too cold? Students tell me the heat kicks on, right? And so then it's very easy transition for me to kind of start talking about this diagram and really talking about how our bodies are set up very similar, right? And so what happens when our body temperature increases? They can tell me, well, we start sweating. Well, what happens when our body temperature decreases? Students can tell me, that they start shivering. So it's a really just good introduction, and because a lot of times they will remember some of this stuff from previous classes, but it's a good way to kind of reintroduce negative feedback loops to them. So students need to understand that negative feedback loops can stabilize the system, right? Kind of going back to that air conditioning unit, keeping that temperature where it needs to be. And positive feedback loops can destabilize, right? So you're moving away from homeostasis. There's a really good video that the Amoeba sisters have out that compares positive and negative feedback loops. So definitely something worth looking into to either show yourself or show the students. But it gives a really good breakdown of the two feedback loops. All right, so what students don't need to know. All right, the assessment does not include the cellular processes involved in feedback mechanisms, right? So if you are talking about positive feedback, right? So in positive feedback, sometimes an example that's used is childbirth, right? So where contractions happen and then hormones are released, and those hormones cause more contractions, which release more hormones. So you kind of get that more. So they need to understand that the positive feedback loop is moving away from homeostasis, that it's destabilizing, but they don't need to know the hormones. They don't need to know anything beyond the fact that it is just a process that is moving away from homeostasis. All right, so here's an example of a phenomena that you can use. This video takes a look at kind of what a runner's high is and explains that. And this will help students think about and consider what happens when a person experiences a runner's high. Right, so is this chemical process going to make someone more or less likely to repeat the activity? You can use this as a warm-up. This would be a good chance to kind of like a think, pair, share, a journal write, shoulder partner, kind of conversations, just to kind of get them thinking before you hit them, kind of with the negative and positive feedback loops.
There was a
All right, so let's dive into some of these resources. This first one is an example of a resource that can be used to generate questions by the students on root response to the environment. So students can design their own experiment on root growth using green onions. The nice thing about this lab is you can tailor it to your class, right? So you can make it as challenging or inquiry based as you want it to be. You can have the students come up with the variables, you can assign the variables. Um, Let me just click on this so you can take a look. So this is through BioInteractive. Um, I love using their resources. So over here off to the side is the actual student handout, educator materials, but they also have some great images as well for the students to look at. All right, the next resource is looking at another lab focusing on breathing and homeostasis. So in this lab, students will investigate positive and negative feedback loops. They will be designing and testing a hypothesis, gathering data, and drawing conclusions. So this is a hands-on activity that will allow students to analyze in the moment what their body is doing and visualize the homeostasis that is being carried out. This would also be a really good opportunity once the students have gathered their data, gathered their evidence. You could create a CER writing opportunity here for them to start practicing, kind of that writing using their evidence, um, to support a claim. All right, our third resource is a case study. So this is an endocrine case study, What's Wrong with Timothy? So in this activity, students are reading a case study and evaluating evidence to determine what is happening to this child. Students will discover that there is something wrong with the child's endocrine system. This would be a really good opportunity for this reading to use some of those reading strategies, some avid reading strategies, close reading, annotating, things like that. All right, so again, just to recap, students need to know um, the difference between positive and negative feedback loops and kind of how they maintain homeostasis or not maintain homeostasis. And if you have any questions on this, please reach out, contact the Science office, and I hope you found this helpful.